Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to a video today that I honestly thought was gonna be, I don't know if the word easier is better, but a video that I thought, I'm like, okay, alright, this is gonna be simple, this is gonna be straightforward, this is gonna be chill. And then when I actually started getting like into and figuring out what I wanted to talk about in this video, I was like, okay, we make it a little less chill. And that is actually, I believe, on one of y'all commented on my Get Ready With Me talking about my channel and wanting ideas. One of you was like, you should talk about the Morphe palettes you would buy if their quality wasn't so inconsistent. And I was like, that's a good idea. I screenshotted it. And then I was going through and I was scrolling through all the Morphe palettes, and I was like, well, how about what the Morphe palettes I would buy if I didn't hate Morphe and if Morphe didn't suck? So the subscriber was like, we're gonna start out nice and easy. And I'm like, this is such a great idea. How can I turn it into something that's gonna be absolutely rage-worthy? That's just the type of person I am. I'm very passionate. I get overexcited very easily. So here we are today talking about the Morphe palettes that I would buy if their quality was consistent, if they didn't suck, and if I didn't hate them. So let's just go on into that, and thank you so much to the subscriber who suggested this because I think it's going to be a fun time. Alright, we might as well start out of the gate with one that y'all probably saw coming, one that y'all were like, okay, I've talked about this shiz on my channel before, and that actually is the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette number 2. I'm not talking about the travesty of those little bitty palettes that she released. I bought those, hated them, decluttered them. What I'm talking about is that beautiful, glorious, oversized, way too many eyeshadows palette with the pinks and the reds and the oranges and the purples, all the colors in the spectrum you could want for any sort of sunset, sunrise aesthetic. I mean, I was really hard pressed not to buy this. Like I've said, I've talked about it a couple different times, and it was just so beautiful. Like, as much as the first one was like not my typical color story because it's a bit more neutral with those pops of blue and those pops of green, this one is so much my jam, my shiznit. It is stunning. I despise Morphe. I will not touch Morphe with a 10-foot pole. If someone wants to send me Morphe, I'll use it. But like I say, I will not be buying it of my own volition with my own money. And this palette was just so beautiful. Like, it released and I was like, why did you have to be Morphe? Why did you have to be a Jaclyn Hill collaboration? Because it was so well done. And I kind of hate Morphe a little bit for them making it so well done, because when it comes to their big palettes, like we're going to talk about ones that I want but are still really stupid layouts, this one had just a really nice gradient going through it. It was thought out. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap all up in that thing because they're only when you're dealing, because I think it was 35 shades. I think that's their usual. When you got that many shades all up in something, you're gonna get some overlap. You're gonna get some similar reds, some similar pinks, some similar oranges, you know. But with all of that being said, if I had money to burn, and if this wasn't a Morphe palette, like if this had been released by like BH Cosmetics or ColourPop, I'm trying to think of another brand that would do such a, you know, Too Faced as well. I mean, they've done it before, but a lot of mainstream brands, high-end, don't really make those big, huge, monolithic palettes. Like if this came out as like a Lorac Pro, who mega something something, who even knows, I would buy this shiz. Oh, I would have bought this shiz. It was just so I was like, oh, the wonderful, amazing, reddy, pinky, purpley, orangey looks I could do with this shiz. It's like it was taking the vibes of the Natasha Denona Sunrise or Sunset. I think I have it with me. Sunrise palette. I feel like it was taking these colors, this like idea here, and jacking it to Jesus. And I wanted to be a part of that so stinking bad. Then I heard that there were some quality issues. They were like, oh, it's the same formula that you know and love from the Jaclyn Hill palette. But as Jen Loves Reviews has informed us, the original Morphe palette Jaclyn Hill formula isn't even the original Morphe Jaclyn Hill formula anymore. They changed it without letting us in on it, and so for them to come out with this one, and I think this is the one that like caused a lot of controversy about the formula, because people were going in and looking at the ingredients and being like, this one of these is not like the other. And I know it had issues with having like carmine in it, because Morphe's all like vegan, cruelty-free, but when you got things like that in it, it's not vegan, it's not cruelty-free. I think it'd be cruelty-free, I don't know. But anyway, it's not vegan, and they were claiming it was all these sorts of things, which it wasn't anymore, which is not cool, which is why I don't like Morphe. But if it hadn't been by them, I would be totally all up in this shiz. I would love to know on any of these palettes that I'm talking about. Let me know if any of y'all have them and if they're actually good, because I have like this much faith in Morphe's quality control. If there's one thing that Morphe's consistent about, it's being inconsistent in their formulas. So I haven't been willing to put down, I don't know, how much do they charge for their palettes? Like 28 or something in that range. You know, I am not putting down that kind of dough on an eyeshadow palette that might be okay. I also have issues with Morphe right now, because they're like, we protect predators. And I'm like, oh, my stars. But all of that aside, it's a beautiful color story, but you know, I haven't bought it because. All right, we got the obvious one out of the way. Now let's talk about, some of these are like, because I have, y'all know on my channel, I have roasted the ever-loving shiz out of Morphe. I have torn their palettes a new one multiple times on my channel. It's something that I enjoy doing, because for the most part, when Morphe does the big giant 35 palettes, they're just the 35 shades, they're just so much. I feel like as a community, we've moved past those really big, huge, giant palettes. We like something a little more curated. And when you think about more curated, it's actually kind of funny, because the Artistry palette, I'm not even sure which one this one is. I called it the Surf and Turf palette. This is the one that has the significant pink and blue gradient, also with brown. Now, I admit, when I look at these things, I'm pretty sure I anti-hauled this one and tore a new one. That's just, I think I anti-hauled the majority of these Morphe palettes. I'm like, I would have bought them if they weren't Morphe. Just because we roast something doesn't mean we don't actually want it. There have been so many cases where I've anti-hauled things and I'm like, I gotta anti-haul this thing because I want to buy it, but I can't. And so with this palette, you look at the blues and you look at the pinks and you're like, oh, that's really pretty. And then you look at the browns and you're like, okay. Because I feel like there's going to be a theme amidst this video. Is part of my issue with Morphe is how disjointed and over cluttered their palettes are. I like to consider myself relatively artistically inclined, like I've got kind of an eye for it. But when I look at these palettes, I like them to be, y'all know what I like. I like smaller. I like concise. I like beautiful depth of gradation. And when you look at the clutteredness, just the amount of eyeshadow that you get in and of itself is intimidating, let alone the colors that they choose to put in this thing. And when you look at this one, I look at it and I'm like, wow. And I analyzed it, because while I'm going through and I was going through and being like, and I actually took a moment to look at it. If you take this palette right here and you take out the brown section and you take out the pink section and you take out the blue section, each of those singular sections, I think it's 2 rows each, look really, really nice. They're each kind of their own curated color story, which is something that would have drawn me to this palette, where I'm like, oh, even amidst all the gigantic mishmash of pink, blue, and brown, if you're able to break it down and look at it in these 3 different palette ways, it makes a lot more sense and makes it a lot more viable in my opinion. But wouldn't it have been so much nicer if Morphe had actually been like, all right, we've got these 3 distinct color stories that flow very well within themselves. Why don't we release 3 different palettes instead of taking all 3 of those beautifully coexisting color stories and smushing them together into one big giant Morphe palette? I don't understand the logic. Well, I understand the logic that they're trying to present, which is like when it comes to eyeshadow, people are like, oh, more is more. And I'm like, no, oftentimes more is too much. You get cluttered, you get repeat shades. If you are going to do a big palette. You're gonna do a palette that has a lot of shades. I need you to do it with precision. I'm gonna bring over a pricey, bougie, whatever. This is my Viseart Grand Pro 3. I actually filmed a get ready with me doing this look today. Keep your eye out for that, or if it is available, I will link it down below. This is a lot of shades. This is in fact 35 shades. But note, with the 35 shades that you get in this Viseart palette compared to the 35 shades you get from a Morphe palette, there is like no room for repeat shades. There's no room for a significant amount of overlap. There's no room for it not being a beautiful gradation of a color story. You've got yellow, boom. You know, you've got each of these super concise rows, and even the lightest shades, they aren't pale enough for them to be pasty setting shades. They've got color to them. And so when I look at these Morphe palettes, and I look at a lot of them, I mean, this is going to be a running theme. Be prepared, you know, because I look at them and then I see something compared to this. And yeah, the price point, I mean, this is astronomical compared to how much a Morphe palette costs. But I feel like you're paying more and you are cutting out that middleman. You're cutting out those unnecessary things, those like frills and those pressed glitters and, you know, pasty setting shades and overlap shades. You're removing that when you're getting something like this. This is one of my, maybe my top #1, definitely 3, definitely 5, end all be all favorite palettes, because it is so concise, because it is to the point, because I look at this and I know what I'm going to do. I'm not fuddling around trying to be like, well, here's a pink and here's a blue and here's a brown. And I understand it is all sorts of subjective. If I talk about one of these Morphe palettes and you love it, it is your end all be all amazing palette, that is fan-tucking-fastic. You keep doing you, boo-boo. But for me, when I've got something like this, and even though there is that slight intrigue that's like, because for as much as I trash things, I mean, let's just be honest right now. For as much as I trash things, you know, internally you look at it and you're like, huh, that could be fun. That could be interesting. That could be a fun time all up on my face. That sounded all kinds of something else, but we're just gonna keep moving on. You know, when I compare a Morphe layout to a layout like this, it's just so inferior to me, because this is just everything I could absolutely want, everything in a palette. It's got perfect, amazing gradation, everything I need. The shades are different enough. It's just this is my baby. So when I have something like this that I spent my money on, seeing kind of just jumbled, half-thought, put together, kind of just eyeshadow palette vomit from Morphe, I'm just a lot less intrigued to buy from them. All right, let's talk about one that I admit I did anti-haul this and I wanted it so bad. The inner, like, the non-this Soraya, the kawaii pastel queen, princess, you know, anime person, really wanted this palette. I was like, I'm going to live out my princess dreams with this shiz. And that is the 35i Ice Fantasy palette, which I believe started out as a collaboration palette. And when I saw that palette, I had no idea who the collaborator was, but I was like, wow, those beautiful icy pastel-y, just like ice queen vibes eyeshadows. I had a moment. I really did. If this had been something, once again, kind of same with, you know, the Jaclyn Hill Volume 2. If this had been something that had been released from ColourPop, from BH Cosmetics, all those other companies, I would have bought it, because just the aesthetic and the beautiful pasteliness and the iciness. And I'm pretty sure part of why I didn't buy it, like 99.99999% sure that 99.999% of it was shimmers, which you all know I would rather much have a, you know, matte dominant palette than a shimmer dominant palette. I understand that when it comes to like those pale pastel-y shades, they're probably more conducive to be formulated well in a shimmer shimmer than they are in a matte. I've tried quite a few different pastel mattes from a couple different companies, and they've never really been amazing. All y'all have told me I need to try the Tokyo something palette from Nomad Cosmetics, and then there's one coming out from Give Me Glow that I really want. But looking at this, I remember just being like filled with all kinds of like, I was like, well, I could just take the shimmer and just waft it across my lid and then do some beautiful eyeliner and just be the amazing kawaii alternative princess I want to be. But in reality, I mean, practically 9 times out of 10, this is more how I suit up. I do have my like girly, feminine, kawaii side, but I do tend to reach for that a little bit less than I do for this sort of look. So, and also, I don't do shimmy, like just like waft a shimmer across my lid. Maybe I should try that, but I don't do it enough to merit like a whole palette of it. I think I've got in my collection somewhere, somehow, some way, some kind of really feminine, girly, ethereal, pasty, pastel-y shimmer that I can wash all over my lid. But like I said, if it wasn't Morphe, I would have this shiz. Like if it was one of those, remember how BH Cosmetics used to have those, or was it Coastal Scents? That would come out with those palettes that were all shimmers and everybody loved them and everybody raved about them and they were amazing and they were cult favorites. You know, if they had done that in this sort of scheme, I'd have been like, shut up and take my money, because it was just so pretty and intriguing and so nice. And I just like, oh, it's so pretty, but I hate Morphe. You know, it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like, wow, you're so pretty, but I have issues with your creator. All right, we're going to talk about, once again, this is kind of like, when I started looking at eyeshadow palettes, I was like, this is going to be easy. And I'm like, I got some thoughts I'm going to say about this. This is going to get really real up in here because I'm going to have to admit some shiz that I don't want to admit to. And that's the fact of being attracted to these palettes in the first place. And that is the 39A Dare to Create. And this is when Morphe, the timeline of Morphe, when they were like, well, we need to make our big giant palettes a little bit more interesting. So why don't we take the eyeshadow shades and put them in there in random different sized pans? Because that's what's going to make the palette interesting. I don't know what it is about the layout of this palette. I don't know what this is about the colors that they picked, because if you look at it, you're like, okay, all right, whatever. It's a fairly basic, although got a nice gradient to it, neutral palette that's got this section over here that's like blue and red and like really rich royal jewel tones. And for some reason, that section of jewel tones juxtaposed against the more neutral, although they are very rich and decadent and nice, just looks so beautiful to me. I don't know why, because I'm looking at it, I'm like, I got dishes, I got these colors, I got them all from different brands, eyeshadow formulas I love, I've got the little creative section. That's another thing that I find funny when they're like, here's a neutral palette with a little section of color and we're gonna call this the Dare to Create palette, like it's like a unique color story that we've never seen before. I'm like, Morphe, it's a crap ton of neutrals with a pop of colors down here. And they're able to get away with that because they release 35 shadow pan palettes. But this one, for some reason, just looked so lush, looked so decadent, looked so interesting and intriguing to me. And even scrolling through and getting my screenshots for this video, I was like, I went past it and I was like, that is beautiful. I don't know why it is so pretty to me, because in all honesty, it's not that unique or not that interesting when you compare it to other things on the market, as well as things that I already have in my collection. But for whatever reason, it looks like the tones evoke to me like Renaissance painting vibes. I have no idea where any of that came from. But wherever it came from, it had me all up in my feels, and I do get a little bit personally offended when I find, this is why this is so soul crushing, and I'm like, I get so personally offended and mad at myself when I find a Morphe palette attractive, because I'm like, I don't like you. I don't want your stuff to be cute. I don't want your stuff to be attractive. I've actually got another video that I'm doing that was inspired on this video, and I'm like, if we're gonna be salty, we might as well be salt of the earth salty. And I'm gonna be doing a video talking about what I believe are some of Morphe's ugliest palettes, because as much as this one is beautiful and the other ones on here I think are pretty, they have released some gnarly looking eyeshadow palettes that I'm like, kind of want to talk about that. So stick around for that. But for this one, this was the Dare to Create. It was just so pretty. I can't remember. I remember it getting a fair amount of flack and people being like, wow, Morphe really up in here thinking they're the next whatever. Because Morphe thinks very highly of itself, and that's also part of issues why I have with the company, because they're just all like, we're amazing. We're the second coming of Christ in makeup company form. Okay, let's talk about one that really... I hate the fact that I want this. I hate the fact that there's a part of me that looks at this and I'm like, this is dumb. This is dumb. This is the biggest ploy that ever existed in makeup creation, and I want it. And that is the 3503 Fierce by Nature, which is a more intriguing interpretation of the 350 with a pop of 2. I count it 2, maybe 3, but if I'm remembering correctly, 2 greens. Y'all know how I feel about a palette with a pop of something, because we all know what that does. Create a palette that's relatively rudimentary. We put a pop of something in it and people look at it and say, I don't have those rudimentary shades with that particular pop of color in it. I need it. And I mean, that's kind of what I did with this, because you look at it, because it's got all those reds and oranges. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, the 350, say what you will about Morphe and what I feel about Morphe, the 350, that color theory F's me up. I could not get a hold of the 350 back when I started YouTube. And I now know how long I've been on this platform because Facebook decided to remind me when I posted my first YouTube video, and that was 5 years ago. So I'm celebrating 5 years. Woo woo! Celebrating 5 years by being self-deprecating up in here. But you look at it and you're like, okay, all right, what is it? It's just a slightly more reimagined version of the 350 with just a little bit of green, just a little bit, just this much green. And to someone who loves green, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I have those shades. I probably have those 2 or 3 green shades so many times over in my collection. There's absolutely no reason to buy this oversized piece of whatever because of the 2 greens. But I cannot deny the strange allure that this thing has for me. It's like an eldritch demon calling to me. It's like, you know that I am redundant. You know that I've got 2 greens. You know that I'm probably not going to give a lot to your already existing collection. But you really want me. And a part of me just looks at it and I'm like, it's so obvious, because like some color stories, when they do that little pop effect, they're like, let's throw it in the corner. You know, Morphe's like, boom! Right in the middle, right up top, right there. You know, they're not even playing. They're not even trying to be like catchy, whatever about it. They're just like, boom. And I feel like it's also the reds and the everything else that is included into it, that it's just such a like striking composition. It's so disgustingly simple. It's so obvious what it's trying to do, but for some reason, to me, it is a beautiful composition. I'm like, wow. That's a lot of repetitive reds with 2 greens in it. F me up. Because I know I tore this shiz a new one. I know it's like, just all those shades, pop of green, stupid, bleh. Which it is. But there's still that part of me that's like, I would like to own that stupid piece of shiz. I really would. And if I had any faith in Morphe's quality, maybe I would have tried some of these. But y'all know that I kind of had a tumbling down relationship with Morphe. I tried a couple things and I was like, this sucks. People got upset for me still buying from them because I was doing things just for the views. So there is all that going about it, but it was just like I said, I know it's dumb. I know it's whatever, but I'm like, for some reason, it's just so pretty to me. All right, let's talk about another one. This one kind of F's me up. This one, I hate it when I look at things that are so big and I'm like, that is kind of nicely curated there, especially when I compare it to stuff that I already have. It's like, I know I already have it, but Morphe, for some reason, when they're able to do a color story kind of okay, it's so frustrating because oftentimes it's just like this big disjointed eyeshadow vomit throw up into a palette. And then when they're able to do something that's a bit more concise and flow, I'm like, oh, what's up? And that is the 35M Boss Mood palette, which was the one that had, I mean, it's mostly rosy brown, but it also had some green and purple. If I love green, I really love green with purple. It's just two of those things that go really well together. And if you look at this, you know that it's not a green and purple palette. It's more, like I said, a rosy brown palette with like little segments of green and purple, but for some reason, the way that they just flow and are put in this palette, I'm just like, that kind of F's me up a little bit. I feel like on this list, the two ones that were like, ooh, burp squad. The two ones that I was the closest to like actually buying would have to be the second Jaclyn Hill one as well as this one, because it just looked so pretty to me. I was like, I want to have that. And I remember people were buying it and they were using it and it was really popular and they were doing beautiful looks on their faces. And I'm like, I want to have that. But at this point, you know, I have gotten where I'm just like not willing to, you know, pass that precipice with Morphe. I'm just like, I don't care how cute you are. I don't care how nice you are. I really don't want to give you money. I really don't like you as a corporation. And boy, have I been tempted by things. Eyeshadows, highlighters. You all know I love that Jeffree Star Starberry Mist. It's what helped give me my healthy, glowy complexion today. And I mean, I got like 12 bottles of that shiz on backup when Morphe was like, it's half off. I was like, yes! Because for someone with dry skin like me, it works really freaking well. And so the Boss Mood one, I vividly remember when it came out, and I vividly remember having just this kind of like this thing deep inside of me that kind of secretly wanted to have that and be on that bandwagon, because I was so attracted to the colors in it and the way it flowed and the way that it was put together. I honestly think that this palette, this is another thing, this palette and the Jaclyn Hill one are two of the best curated palettes. Like, they're just put together in an appealing way compared to a lot of the other ones they released. That's just like, bleh. So part of it really is that, where you look at it and you're like, that is actually, yeah, there's way too much of it, but it's a really nicely well thought out color theory that, you know, kind of jives with me in a way. Like I said earlier, tell me if this stuff is amazing, because I'm just like, I've been burned by Morphe 1-2 times. I've been burned by the quality of their makeup. I've been burned by them as a company. I've been burned by who they like to associate with. And definitely if this had been released by someone else, this color story, it would have been mine. I would only probably use the majority of the greens and purples. And I mean, I would use the rosy brown too. If it was a good quality, you all know this. Usually I'm not a neutral person. But the Natasha Denona Glam and Bronze palette, there was a Get Ready With Me using those, are some of my favorite neutral palettes because they're formulated so well. I can look past a semi-boring color story or repetitive color story if the formula is fan-tucking-fastic. And 9 times out of 10, Morphe just isn't cutting it on that front for me. I know there are people who are slaves to the Morphe brand. I've tried their brushes. Their brushes are awful, or at least the ones I've tried. So I wouldn't be doing that one, but it's just, I know there's just a part of me. It's like admitting when I really wanted, when the Sephora did that Moschino, I always forget and someone always tells me down below. But when they did that big old teddy bear palette, I was like, this is the stupidest thing that ever existed. People shouldn't buy this. And in my heart of hearts, I was like, I want giant teddy bear eyeshadow palette in toy packaging so I can put it in my background. And apparently the quality of that shiz was amazing. So it was like, but that had to be truthful with myself. Had to admit that I actually kind of wanted that. And that's where we're at with these, where I'm like, yeah, tore my new one, but they still cute. Then the last one, we're actually able to talk about all the ones that I picked. Yay, us. This is the 35H Hotspot Blues and Reds, which, if we're being honest, is honestly the Surf and Turf palette without the brown, which I'd probably be a lot more inclined to get into than with the brown. I mean, the brown, you look at it and you're like, brown section, red section, blue section, you know, do that. But this one just, you know, the funny thing is I'm not someone who does a huge amount of blue. I love it when I do blue. I'm like, wow, this is so striking. I should do this more often. But I don't do it. If I'm going to do green. I've done a lot of purple recently. I've done some pink. I've done some red. You know, blue is great. And like I said, I love it when I use it, but I don't naturally reach for it as much as, say, green. But looking at this, I don't know if it's the just obvious juxtaposition of the warm tones and the cool tones against each other that make it so intriguing to me. Like, I think it would have been a different story if it had just been kind of, you know, blue here, red here, rather than it being this kind of concise red, blue, warm, cool, fire and ice kind of thing. And like I said, when you have the eyeshadow palette layouts by Morphe that are actually really good, they're really, really good. Like I said, there's too much of it, but it is still nice and appealing looking. I feel like out of all of these, the ones that I would be least likely to actually ever do would have to be the Surf and Turf and this one. That's kind of sad that I would buy the 3503 with the pop of green more than I would buy the Hotspot or the Surf and Turf one. But we need a palette called Surf and Turf. Would that not be so much fun? I just did it because of the colors. I'm like, oh, blue, surf, and red, turf. I don't know. Because a lot of things that we eat out of the ocean are red. We don't like land bugs, but boy, do we love underwater bugs. But looking at this and doing this was actually a lot of fun when I'm looking at it and thinking about it. Like, I started off and I was like, oh, this is a great idea. This is going to be kind of fun, funky, and interesting. And then as I got more into it and I looked at more palettes, I was like, this is going to be a little bit soul searching, a little bit eye opening. Because as I just went through, I was like, oh, I want to say that about that palette. Ooh, I want to talk about that shiz. Ooh, that one right there. That one kind of offends me, but I still sort of want it kind of way. It was just kind of funny where it started off with this what, and I was like, ooh, girl. I had so much fun doing this, and honestly, thank you so much to the subscriber who suggested it. I would love to hear what y'all have to say about these palettes because it's just kind of funny how, you know, I think, you know, how much internally we kind of actually want things that we say we don't, you know, and I'm sure I talked about them in anti-hauls and everything. And besides anti-hauling, probably the main thing for me though is because, yeah, Morphe's formula is disturbingly inconsistent. So you have that to take into consideration, but also the main thing that's keeping me from buying these, regardless of layout, regardless of price point, regardless of redundancy, is really the fact that I don't like Morphe. I think they are a shady company. I think they do bad things. I don't think they really have the interests of the consumer in mind if the consumer is not someone who's going to kiss up and, you know, do all of that. I think that Morphe should be called out a little bit more because we got all these people hating all up on Jeffree, and I'm like, yeah, but you got the Morphe too. So in the end, that's really the real thing keeping me from buying these, aside from money I don't have and all those other things. It would be fun. If I had money to burn and I didn't hate Morphe, it would be fun to get these and being like, buying all the Morphe palettes I wanted but didn't buy. That could be a fun video. That could be a fun, you know, I'm going to review all of them in this little tell-all video to really see if the quality is as bad as I sometimes tend to think it is, or if it really is something that's actually well formulated, because we've had that before. Just because a company is fairly known for being inconsistent doesn't mean it doesn't make good things. And just because a company makes the majority of good things doesn't mean they can't make bad things. But I really enjoyed this. I thought this was a fun video that was a little bit different, a little bit it just really inspired me, and I'm really grateful for that. Like I said, would love to hear what y'all have to say about these palettes. Spill the tea, let me know. Because just because I don't like Morphe doesn't mean other people don't like Morphe, doesn't mean they don't got good products, so I would like to know. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah.